Hi friends, it's Unicorn, and today is a follow-up of my Books of the Year in China video to celebrate the New Year. You may think that it's already 2 weeks after the New Year, but it's actually very timely because in China we also celebrate the number 15 days after the New Year. It's called the Lantern Festival. So traditionally on that day we have lantern shows at night, and also we eat yuanxiao. It's some kind of glutinous rice flour ball with different fillings inside, and it's really delicious. But today we're not here to talk about the food, we're here to talk about books. Looking at the top list of genre fictions and non-fictions are very interesting because they have some fundamental differences compared to the list that we generated in the English reading community. Using Goodreads as an example, every year Goodreads has its own awards for different subgenres, and in 2023 it has 15 subgenres. Within the 15 genres in 2023, there are 11 fictional genres, including traditional genres such as fiction, historical fiction, mystery and thrillers, and a lot more. But it also has some newer genres like romantasy, which is quite popular last year on BookTube. Books also have been categorized by the target reading audiences like young adult fantasy and young adult fiction. There are also 4 non-fiction genres, and they are non-fiction, memoirs and autobiography, history and biography, and humor. In the Chinese reading community, however, the categories looks very different. For example, the community that I'm looking at on Douban, they have 10 subgenres besides the general fiction and non-fiction top list. And only 2 of the subgenres are fictional. They're mystery and detective fiction and science fiction and fantasy. And there are 1 category for poetry specifically and 1 for illustrated books. And all the other 6 subgenres are non-fiction. They are categorized as history and culture literature, society and documentary literature, books on science, books on arts and design, books on filmography, and books on business. I think from here, we can tell that differences for the 2 communities are very obvious. In China, people put a lot of emphasis on non-fiction and value poetry a lot more to give it a one specific genre, which I think also can be explained from the culture and history perspective. And on Goodreads, the system and readers apparently pay a lot more attention onto fictions and storytelling. Even the non-fiction subgenres are separated by the story-driven factors like memoirs and biography. I feel like this comparison is very interesting, and today I want to introduce some books from these subgenre lists that I am interested in. Not to represent reading taste from any particular community, I just want to share books from the genres that I like to read personally, and the categories that I'm going to talk about are 2 non-fictions, including the non-fictions on history and culture, non-fictions on society and documentary or like investigative literature, and 2 fictional genres, and they are mystery and detective fiction and science fiction and fantasy. And I'll have timestamps here on the screen and also down below. Please feel free to jump around if you have some specific genres that you are interested in, because I think in general this video is gonna be quite long. So now, without further ado, let's get started with the first genre, which is nonfiction on history and culture. 10 books on the top 10 list, of course, and 5 of them are about Chinese history specific, including the oral history by the profound translator Yang Yi, talking about Chinese history in the recent 100 years with her personal stories. It's called 100年许多人许多事 100 years, many things, many people. And then there is 世说俗谈 by Liu Bo. I think the title roughly translates to a folk account of the tales of the world, which I don't guarantee the accuracy of this translation. This is a new look to the classic and historical Chinese book 世说新语, which has its official translation, and it's called A New Account of the Tales of the World. So the classic book is an essay collection from 魏晋南北朝, which is an era around the year 220 to 589, writing about the interesting things and costumes in that time period. This new book is a commentary and analysis of that, understanding the book from a modern lens, which I found could be very interesting. Another one is called 入关 by Zhang Pengliang. This means crossing the border. It talks about the time when Qing dynasty was built, and it was around the 17th century. The book includes the power plays among the Manchus, Mongols, and Ming dynasty. Sounds like a very dense historical book. Interestingly, there are 2 books written about Chinese history by non-Chinese writers. The first one is Sex, Law, and Society in Late Imperial China by Matthew Sommer. This title was very self-explanatory and it was translated into Chinese as 中华帝国晚期的性、法律与社会. And the second one is Chinese Typewriter by Thomas Mullaney, which is literally about the history of Chinese typewriter. The earliest Chinese typewriters had like 5,000 keys. This book looks into the history of typing Chinese characters, which is a very niche and very interesting part of history, in my opinion. And this is exactly that kind of book where we don't know we want to read. 3 books in the history genre about women's study, including Caliban and the Witch, Women, the Body, and Primitive Accumulation by Sylvia Federici, which I've already talked about in last week's video, so I won't repeat myself here. And then there is 开场女性学者访谈. The title translates to Openings, Conversations with Women Scholars. It is a collection of articles by the literary critique sector in a news publisher called 新京报书评周刊. They talk about the dilemmas that women face in modern life and discuss topics like women in academia, labellism for women, day-to-day difficulties, and much more. It includes many writers that I am very familiar with, such as Ueno Shizuko and Dai Jianhua, Bao Huiyi. So I'm like low-key interested in this book. The last book on the women's study is a French book called Rage Against Machisme by Mathilde Larrere, and I'm so sorry I'm butchering the names here, which translates to 去他的父权制, and it was translated by Runzhe. I didn't find an English version of this book. It's a classic work of the author, which revisited the feminism movement in France for the past 200 years. 2 books in this category focusing on the Western countries. The first one is called The Spirit Catches You and You Fell Down, translated into Chinese as 要命还是要灵魂 by Tang Liming, Liu Jiantai, and Yang Jiarong. This book talks about a medical case in the States where the doctor's treatment seems as frosty arrogance because of the culture difference between the Western medicine and the patient's culture. The last book here is The 5, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Hallie Robinhood, translated to 生儿为女, 开膛手杰克案女性被忽视的生活 by 小水. This is a book that tells the story of the victims who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. Next, let's move on to the next category I want to talk about, which is societal and documentary books. 5 books here related to feminism again, but compared to the books in the history sector, these books mainly talk about modern women's lives and reality instead of like a historical point of view. Books here include The Ikino Bilu Dameno Sisyu by Ueno Shizuko, translated as 为了活下去的思想. And the title means the ideology in order to survive. And this is another book that I've talked about in my best book of the year video, so I'll link it down below. However, Ueno Shizuko is so popular that she has 2 books on this list. So the other one is 快乐Kyoto, which is translated into Chinese as 快乐上等. This is a conversation between Ueno and Yu Yamaliko. They talk about how they understand life, marriage, love, and sex, and how they think that people should prioritize enjoyment in life, especially after the earthquake and tsunami in Japan in 2011. Another book from Japan here is Neglect, 育儿放弃. It is written by Tsukiyama Haru. The English translation is Child Neglect. This is an investigative report of a case where a 3-year-old girl died due to being neglected by her parents. She had a 1.5-year-old brother when she died, and her mom was pregnant at the same time. This is a book that investigates into the cases, discussing the responsibilities from all parties and all the people around this little girl, as well as asking the important question, which is why the mothers are always the one that got blamed the most. Following, we have 严正 by Yi Xiaohe. 严正 is the name of a town, and this book is talking about women's lives and roles in this historical town in Sichuan, where people are still holding on to some very traditional values. And at the same time, they're also facing the modern challenges and pressures nonetheless. This is a book that talks about the lives and confusions of 12 different women in the town, and also a book that I'm very interested in reading. The last book that directly talking about women and feminism has a very bold title that may upset some people. It is I Hate Men by Pauline Hermange and translated to 我厌男 by Yi Qiandu. This is a book talking about why so many people started to stating that they don't like men. Not like sexually, but in general. And it's talking about what if mistrusting men or disliking men and maybe maybe even hating men is actually a useful response to sexism. A very interesting take on the topic, I have to say, and it's also better received in the Chinese reading community compared to the English reading community on Goodreads. So many men are mad about this book on Goodreads, which frankly, it's very interesting to see. And it also makes me quite curious about this book. Moving on to other topics, 2 books about the current Chinese society, and especially talking towards young people's difficulties. The first one is 多谈谈问题, The Issues Issue by 丹祥杰, which again, you can find in the Books of the Year video. And the second one is called 金榜题名之后. This is a collection of articles that roughly translates to after college acceptance. For the longest time in China, people believe that going to a good university is the key to success. However, in recent years, people started to realize that maybe that is not enough. This book focusing on the reason behind it, analyzing students from different economic backgrounds, looks into the question of how to be competitive as a college graduate student. The rest 3 books are translated. The first one is Making the Familiar and Familiar by Zygmunt Bauman and Peter Heffler. This book is translated into 将熟悉变为陌生 by Wang Liqiu. This is a conversation between the Polish-born sociologist and philosopher and the Swiss journalist. It's talking about a very familiar topic of Bauman, which is liquid modernity. Bauman is the author of Work, Consumerism, and the New Poor, which is a book that I really want to read, so this book actually reminds me to read that. Then there is a French book that I cannot pronounce. The Chinese name is 工厂日记, and the French name is Here. It's written by Simone Weil and translated by Wang Tianyu. The Chinese title translates to Diaries in the Factory. It's talking about in 1934, the author decided to experience 1 year in factories instead of doing her regular job, which is a philosophy professor. And she wrote her observations of the experiences and lives about the factory workers, topics including daily activities, injuries, humiliations at work, and unfairness. This is a book of original journals without too many sentimental attachment, but precisely because of that, this became a very valuable document. The last book here is also a diary. It's like Diary on a Farm. It's called Diddly Squat, A Year on the Farm by Jeremy Clarkson. The Chinese title is 克拉克森的农场, translated by Wu Chao. This is an essay collection of Clarkson about the year that he decided to run a farm and documenting how he finds joys doing the busy and difficult farm work. Thinking about this book actually feels like deja vu because I feel like I've talked about it before, but I have no recollection of when and why. And also this book was firstly published in 2021 and was newly translated into Chinese last year, so I just don't know where the feeling is from. And now let's move on to fiction. I want to talk about my favorite genre first, which is mystery and detective novels. And this category is very interesting. It's almost dominated by Japanese mystery. Out of the 10 books here, 7 of them are from Japan, 1 from the UK, 1 was translated from French, and 1 was written originally in Chinese. I think maybe by now you can understand more about where my love for Japanese mystery came from. Anyhow, let's talk about the books. Books written in Chinese here is called 第欧根尼变奏曲 by Chenjun, and he's a writer that debuted in Japan and got like a mystery award in Japan. And the title translates to Diogenes Variations. This is a short story collection, and it is said that it's mysterious, horrifying with fantasy elements. French one doesn't have an English translation. The Chinese title is called 两度, means twice, and it was written by Frank Tillis, and it was translated into Chinese by 萨姆斯. In 2008, a 17-year-old girl went missing in a small French town. After an unbelievable rain of dead birds instead of raindrops, her father discovered that he landed in the year of 2020. And in this new timeline, his daughter is still missing, and he is set to find out the truth. And I feel like the story already sounds very interesting and thrilling. The book from the UK is The Man Who Died Twice, the second book in the beloved series of Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, which is translated to 活了2次的男人 by 张雅琳. This book is quite popular in the English bookternet, so I won't go into too much detail here, but I'm really happy to see it on this list. And now let's talk about all the Japanese mysteries. 2 of them I've already read. The first one is Hinoko by Shizuku Hui Xiusuke, and the title translates to Flames. This is a thriller that briefly touches on the death penalty in Japan. It's talking about a person who is acquitted from death penalty by this judge, and he happened to move to the next door of the judge after 2 years. And after he arrived, the family of the judge started to fall apart. I really liked this book, and I've talked about it in my favorites video, I think, and I also have watched the TV series about it. The second book I have read here is Rukuni no Utsunoki na Daigakuse. It is written by Asakura Akinari. The Chinese translation is called 六个说谎的大学生, and it's translated by Wang Xingxing. The story is centered around 6 new graduate students from college. They went into the competition of the same position in a very popular company. However, they were told that they may have the chance to get hired entirely, like 6 of them altogether. But of course, something happened, and their personal stories and histories, especially the negative ones, started to unveil, and one of them even died after. The book jumps between the time of the hearing and also 8 years later, when one of the members started to investigate the whole event. This book has a very clever setting and was playing with the readers. I enjoyed it a lot when I was reading it, and it also was ranked number 1 on this genre. And now there are 5 books that I haven't read, but I'm like interested in reading all of them. The first one is Glaiwo Daga, and it's written by Takano Kazuraki. The title means grave digger, and the Chinese title is called 恶徒的救赎, translated by Xu Jianxiong. The book started with a serial murder cases in Tokyo, but when the police started to investigate, a person came to the hospital to donate his bone marrows to some patients, like out of charity. But he didn't know that his friend was also killed in the cases, and he himself became a suspect of the police. So he has to run for his life, and at the same time, he decided to investigate the cases by himself. It's sad that this book has so many twists and turns and very nerve-wracking. Then there is Kuroro Sho, and it's written by Yonezawa Honobu. The Chinese translation is called Hei Lao Cheng and translated by Xiao Yao. It's just like a city name, I assume. This is a historical mystery set in the Tenshou era. The book uses real historical figures as characters and talking about some murder cases in this closed-off town. We have Glass no Do no Sajujin by Qinyan Mikido. It means murders in the glass towers. The Chinese translation is called 玻璃塔谜案, translated by Ye Yi. This is a classic isolated location and closed-door mystery. There's a 12-story glass tower in the middle of nowhere, and many people got together by the invitation of the owner, but of course they found themselves stuck there because of the weather. And at the same time, the truth of a murder case from 13 years ago slowly revealed itself. Moving on, we have Vinkente no Ikanye by Shirai Tomoyuki. The Chinese title is called 名侦探的献祭, translated by Liu Lingzhi. This book is inspired by the massive suicide of People's Temple in America, which makes it very intriguing, and I want to read it so badly, and the book also ranked number 3 last year. The last book in this category is called Kudono Laihouxia, and it's written by Hojo Kie. The Chinese translation was translated by Mu Di, and it's called 孤岛的来访者. It means visitors from a remote island. From the title, we can tell that this is another isolated location case. A person wanted to revenge for their friend, so they gathered 9 people together to this island. But before they start killing, someone already died. So it's a classic setting with a twist. So that's all the top 10 books on the mystery and detective fiction genre. Heavy on the Japanese literature, which I call a genre that exposed that my Japanese sucks. Anyhow, we can tell that there's so many Japanese mystery available in Chinese rather than English. Why do I like Japanese mystery? Maybe because I read them growing up, or maybe I read them so many growing up because I like them. It's like chicken and egg situation. However, let's move on to the last category. The last category I want to talk about here is science fiction and fantasy. I'm not a heavy sci-fi and fantasy reader, but I am interested to explore more in this genre. And also, ever since I bashed on 3-body problems on my channel, many of you guys asked me if I have other Chinese science fiction recommendations, which unfortunately I don't. But I think this is a good chance for us to see which sci-fi and fantasy books that Chinese readers are reading and prefer last year. So there are 3 books by Chinese authors on this list, and let's talk about them first. The book that ranked number 1, which is also a book that I am personally interested in reading the most, is called 他对此感到厌烦, and it's written by Fou He. The title translates to "She got bored about this." This is a fantasy story talking about a protagonist who is playing a romancy video game, and she actually went into the game. After successfully romance the characters that she's supposed to romance, she found out that she still cannot go back to her real life. And in order to do that, she has to beat all the side quests and storylines in the game. Eventually, she got to where she could choose her own fate. Of course, she got bored and decided to break the game. This is essentially a story talking about women taking control of their lives. A lot of people describe it as 大爽文, which means something that you feel very satisfied when reading. I actually got the e-version of this book that I want to see what's going on. Back to the list. The second book here is 我们生活在南京 by 天瑞说服. The title means We Live in Nanjing. This is a science fiction talking about 5 years before an announced alien's invasion to Earth. A high school boy met a girl who claims that she came from 40 years later. I have to say, this sounds very interesting. The last Chinese book here is called 婉转环, The Serpentine Band by Ming. This is a short story collection. Because the author has academia background, it is said that her story have very broad vision and very rigorous. Now let's move on to the rest of the book. One of them we are already very familiar with, which is Babel by R.F. Kuang, and it is ranked number 4 on the list, and is translated as 巴别塔 by Chenjun. Then there are 2 short story collections by the same author. The first one is The Best of Greg Egan, a short science fiction collection of Greg Egan, of course, which is translated to 祈祷之海 by 鲁东旭、阿古、刘文元、萧傲然 and Zhang Han. And the other one is also by the same author, and it's called Acdemia. The Chinese title is 意识上传中 by Yao Xianghui. This is another short story collection, and the interesting things about those 2 books are they're not even from the same publisher, so I'm not sure what happened there. Besides those 2, there are 2 other short story collections on the list. I found that in the Chinese reading community, people really love short story collections. There are a lot more of them compared to in the English reading community. The first one is The Book of Wonder by Lord Dunsany, translated into 奇迹之书 by He Shang and Zhang Luoluo. This is a collection of fantasy stories. And then we have Nikushoku Yashiki. The title translates to Carnival House, and it was translated into Chinese as 破烂回收店. And this is a collection of science fiction short stories. The rest 2 books here are full-length novels. The first one is translated from Korean called 地球尽头的温室, written by Kim Jong-yap. This book I don't see an English translation yet, and the title means The Greenhouse at the End of the World. It sounds very interesting. It's talking about in the aftermath of the climate change, plants went extinct for most part on Earth. However, in a very special city, there's a greenhouse that is hosting some very important and unique plants. The setting sounds fascinating and sounds like it's an exploration of humanity and the future. And the last book was translated from German as Quality Land by Mark Clean. This is a classic. The Chinese translation is called 未来之城, translated by Wang Bingyi. In the future, there is a city called Quality Land, and it is said that this is the best place on Earth. In Quality Land, there is a universal ranking system, determines the social advantages and career opportunities of every member of the society. Everything was planned out and it's perfect. However, life is never perfect, and it's very hard to calculate, so one day the protagonist realized that his world just went wrong. I feel like the setting is very intriguing, and I'm very interested in this book. And that concludes all the books that I want to introduce in this video. I know that it's a lot. To be honest, at first I wanted to only talk about the books that I am personally interested in, but I am a very curious person and a lot of them sounds amazing. So at some point I thought might as well just talk about them out. So I hope you enjoyed this video and find it entertaining. And now we know more about the Chinese reading community and what the Chinese reader are reading. Please let me know if you have any thoughts about any of the things I mentioned in this video or any of the books that you have read or heard about. And don't forget to say hi in the comment section down below. Thumbs up to this video if you liked it. Wish you happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you in my next bookish video. Take care.